Now, it has been a very strong start for Labour as the results from the local council elections have started to come in. It's a bit of a slow process. We won't really know it all until Saturday evening, maybe even Sunday morning. Labour's won control of a string of key Leave voting councils in England and Wales, taking Rushmore in Hampshire from the Conservatives. That's a council the Tories have run for the last 24 years.
Yes, it's also won back Hartlepool Council, the scene of a major by-election loss back in 2021, which led Sir Keir Starmer to consider quitting as leader.
All right, let's have a look at the overall picture then. As we said, strong for Labour so far. They've gained 58 councillors as it currently stands, taking control of Rushmore, Hartlepool and Thurrock. Lib Dems are also up 4 councillors. They've got 14... no, I beg your pardon. They've got 14 additional councillors. They've got 4 councillors, 97 councillors at the moment. The Greens also up. They're up 12 at the moment, but they've not gained control of any council. Results from more than 70 councils still to come in.
So lots to go through. Joining us now is political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heale. Good to see you this morning. James, what's your assessment of what we've seen so far?
Well, I think what's so striking is that it basically confirms what we saw 12 months ago. The polls really haven't moved since the May 2023 local elections, and the public seem to have clearly made up their mind. They want the Tories out of office, and they want Keir Starmer to be Prime Minister, and they will be heartened that not only are they slightly up on last year, but they're doing particularly well in marginals, places like Thurrock and Redditch as well, and so that's a good sign. They're concentrating, they'll vote well, and are on course to win number 10.
Is there anything we can extrapolate from this in terms of the council numbers? Because, I mean, what were the Tories saying would be a worst-case scenario for them, about losing 500? They
were talking about 500 council seats, and now we see that we're in line with that kind of figure. I think 450, 500 is the figure I've seen this morning. There will be some talk. I think the Tory spin will be focusing on the mayoralties, which we're expecting later today. We're expecting Tees Valley, which is Ben Houchen's mayoralty, around 12:30. But I think they'll be talking up things like, Heale Council, where the Tories just held on there, rather than talking about places like Redditch, which the Labour did very well on, winning 21 out of 27 council seats in a crucial marginal going into this election.
You say that these results so far show us that people have made up their mind. They're very similar to the results that we saw 12 months ago. But do you think we're seeing the sort of excitement that we saw pre-1997 Labour landslide victory? We're not there, are we?
I would say perhaps that, in polling, for instance, and focus groups, Keir Starmer doesn't perhaps command the excitement that Tony Blair once did. But I would say that Labour really don't care, to be honest. They will say, look, there's not much enthusiasm for us, but there's real loathing for the Tories. And they will think a vote is a vote. And some of the issues, some of the commentary overnight talking about, potential issues about Keir Starmer, that's all for a kind of second-term Labour government. I think he'll be very happy where they are right now, and he is on course to win a whopping majority. And just to say, look at these results. If anything, they're kind of worse than 1997. Back then, the Tories lost 1 and 2 MPs. Some of these polls suggest they're on course to lose 2 in 3.
What is interesting is that you say nothing's changed in the last 12 months. Well, Rishi Sunak's mandate was to bring things back for the Tories. He's been in 18 months or so now. The implication from that is that he has not achieved anything.
Yeah, and that will be the argument we're hearing a lot of over the weekend. I know there's Conservative MPs meeting to discuss what's going on, and we'll be chatting all about it. But I think that, there is clearly a sense of who else could there be, and I think that it's as much a reflection on the party it is on the Prime Minister. We look where we were 18 months ago, Liz Truss. You look at the polls now, we're in a similar position. But I think supporters of the Prime Minister will come out and argue that, no one could really have changed this. And I suspect we're going to see 6 more months of this carrying on the same vein, because I don't see any kind of public support for an alternative.
Well, except that those on the back benches who are determined to see Rishi Sunak go, well, this is the kick they possibly need to get those numbers in.
Well, I think there's a lot about expectation management, and a lot of this was priced in. We've just seen the third biggest swing at a by-election since the Second World War in Blackpool South, and yet, a lot of the Prime Minister's supporters will go out there and say, well, at least we weren't beaten by reform. So I think that, obviously there's not much to be taken from a Conservative point of view here this morning, but I just don't think that where we're at right now, the Conservatives are going to probably move against their leader.
Just to bring you up to date with the very latest, and Labour have retained control of Lincoln after gaining 3 seats, leaving the party with 23 out of the 33 seats on the council. Tories lost 4 seats, Lib Dems gaining 1, both those parties now have 5 councillors. So 5 councillors each for those to 23 for the Labour Party. But I mean, these are big differences, and yet you just look at it and go, well, I'm not surprised.
Well, I think the public has made up their mind, really. And I think if you talk to pollsters, you look at things in focus groups, they have what they call news avoidance, where a lot of voters have actually tuned out. And I think they've tuned out and they're waiting for each kind of electoral test. And every single one has been pretty bad for the Conservatives since Rishi Sunak took over, other than Uxbridge. And that's why I think will be interesting to see what happens to the London Mayoralty when it declares later tomorrow, given the ULEZ issue there.
How do you think this is going down in Labour HQ? How will they feel they performed last?
I think they'll be really happy with this. Obviously, no complacency is the mantra of people like Morgan McSweeney in Labour HQ. But they will be particularly keen to note the fact that they're doing really well in those marginal areas. So it's all about vote dispersal. And under first past the post, they're putting the votes exactly where they need to win a big majority, unlike 2019 when they did pretty badly at that.
Can we talk about the Lib Dems in all of this? Lib Dems have a reputation for being pretty good when it comes to local elections. They're good campaigners street to street. I mean, they're up slightly. Was it 12, 14 seats up so far? But should they have been doing better in the run-up to a general election?
Well, I think we'll see that later today. And when the Wokingham Borough Council, for instance, comes in, places like Dorset, where they've been campaigning really hard. And I think that's what they're trying to do, is look around Oxfordshire, look around the West Country, where, of course, that was a big mainstay of the Lib Dems' success in the noughties and early 2010s. And I think that really it's about making sure that concentrating their vote is key. Last time, of course, we saw Jo Swinson pretending she was going to be the next Prime Minister. They did terribly. She lost her own seat last time. This time, Ed Davey is basically spending every weekend out in places like Oxfordshire and Surrey, all around the south of England, to try and eat into the Tory seats in the Blue Wall in the southeast of England.
OK, James Heale, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, of course, it's not just those local elections and mayoral elections. Sir Keir Starmer says its win in the by-election in Blackpool South, that's a parliamentary by-election, of course, is the most important result today. Chris Webb taking the seat previously held by the Conservative Scott Benton, who stood down following a lobbying scandal.
Well, here is how it was all decided. Well, Chris Webb of the Labour Party, 10,825 votes. David Jones, Conservative Party, 3,218 votes. And Mark Butcher, Reform Party, 3,101 votes. Ben Thomas, Green Party, 368 votes. Andrew Cregan, Liberal Democrats, 387 votes.
I declare that Christopher Paul Webb is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for the Blackpool South constituency.
Correspondent Olivia Utley, very good to see you this morning, Olivia. This is a significant blow to Rishi Sunak, isn't it? And being described as a seismic win for the Labour Party.
It absolutely is both a huge blow for Rishi Sunak and a spectacular win for the Labour Party, a swing of 26%. That is double what Labour would need to win a general election. It's also, as I think James mentioned earlier, the third biggest by-election swing since the Second World War and the sixth biggest swing to Labour since 2019. That's 6 swings of over 20% since the general election 6 years ago. That is really, really bad news for Rishi Sunak. The last time that we saw swings of this magnitude was between 1992 and 1997. And, of course, we all know how that ends. You mentioned, Ellie, earlier, which I thought was an interesting point, the idea that although there are big swings towards Labour and people are constantly making the comparison with 1997, there is no evidence that there's the same kind of groundswell of huge enthusiasm and optimism for Keir Starmer as there was for Blair in 1997. And I think, actually, this by-election sort of bears that out. There was only a turnout of 32%. That's the lowest by-election turnout we've seen since the general election. But, as Labour people keep saying, it doesn't really matter. General elections are won by who goes out to the polling station to vote. And as we're seeing time and again, the people who are turning up are voting very, very clearly for Labour.
It's a huge swing, Olivia, but how much of that is likely to be wanting to punish the Tories because of the Scott Benton scandal? Will that have played into this?
There probably is an element of that. Scott Benton was stung in a pretty embarrassing lobbying scandal. The Times newspaper approached him a few months ago, posing as lobbyists from the gambling industry. And Scott Benton essentially said, yes, I'll do whatever you like as long as you pay me enough money. Those are pretty bad conditions under which to have to step down. He was suspended for 35 days from the House of Commons, eventually triggering this by-election. So certainly there will be some people in Blackpool who wanted to show their anger at the Conservatives for Scott Benton's behaviour. But this isn't a one-off. This isn't some sort of anomaly. Time and time again, we are seeing these huge swings towards the Labour Party. Blackpool, of course, isn't a kind of Tory stronghold. It was a Labour seat between 1997 and 2019 when the Conservatives managed to win it with a majority of just over 3,000 when the red wall came crumbling down. But the fact that Labour won it with such a huge majority this time round shows just how bad things are for the Conservatives. I think one other important thing to mention is how Reform did this time round. They wanted to beat the Conservatives to second place, and they almost managed to do just that. They ended up losing to the Conservatives by just 117 votes. Reform now say that they are the big contenders. They are the big opposition in those red wall seats. And I think polling does bear that out. That said, in 2013, 2014, UKIP were polling far better than Reform is doing now. And if they are really planning to win some seats in the general election, they're going to have to up their game. Coming third place in a constituency where they have been campaigning really hard and put a lot of their resources isn't really good enough. And it's the one thing that the Conservatives will be able to go home with today. They can say to their supporters, well, at least we didn't come third place to Reform.
How do you think this is going to be going down in CCHQ this morning, Olivia? Because we heard remarks, didn't we, from the new Blackpool South MP, Chris Webb, in the early hours. He called on Rishi Sunak to do the decent thing, to admit that he's failed and call a general election. Do you think they'll heed that advice?
I have always said that I think it's very unlikely that Rishi Sunak will, if he has any choice in the matter, call a general election anytime soon. The policies which he's been putting in place over the past few months, the Rwanda policy, his policies on reducing inflation and trying to get those interest rates down, he hopes, and the figures sort of bear him out, that later in the year some of the fruits of those policies will begin to show. Hopefully there will be a drop in migrants coming across the Channel, and eventually we should see inflation coming down to an extent where interest rates start to fall. I think it is unlikely that Rishi Sunak would choose to go to the polls before he is able to see some of the dividends from those policies. That said, it might not be up to him. CCHQ, Conservative backbenchers will not be pleased with the results of this by-election. Yes, it was expected that they were going to lose this seat to Labour, but the size of the swing is really bad news, coupled, of course, with what looks like a very bad night in the local elections around the country. It could be that in the coming days and weeks, Conservative backbench MPs start to send their letters of no confidence in to Rishi Sunak. It seems unlikely that they would reach the numbers that would be required to actually depose him in a vote of no confidence. But if they start getting near that number to even trigger that vote of no confidence, it could be that Rishi Sunak decides he has no choice but to call a general election. I still think that is quite unlikely. There doesn't seem to be that much appetite from Conservative MPs I've spoken to yet to remove their leader this close to the general election. But I think a lot will happen in the coming hours, really, in the coming hours and days in those local election results, which could change all that.